Welcome back to day 2 of our webinar. I'd just like to remind everyone very quickly of a few housekeeping points before we start. We're very happy today to have interpretation between English, Russian, and Arabic. So I'd ask everyone to please select your preferred language using the interpretation icon, which is at the bottom of your screen. If you're not speaking during the webinar, we'd appreciate it if you could both mute your microphone and turn your camera off to help reduce the bandwidth and make it easier for everyone to hear and see what's going on. And final point of housekeeping, we very much want to hear and respond to your questions and comments. And it's possible for you to share those in two ways. You can either type them into the chat at any time during the webinar, or you can raise your hands in the Q&A session. So we've got a very packed agenda for today, and I want to ensure that we have as much time as possible for those Q&A sessions. So I'm going to be trying to keep my introductions as brief as possible. And I'd also like to ask our speakers to keep to their allocated times. I'm afraid I may have to be a little bit strict on that, so I apologize in advance if I need to interrupt anyone. So in our last session, we were looking at international statistical frameworks and guidelines relating to climate change. And in our next session, starting in a moment, we're going to be doing the same, except focusing more on disaster-related statistics. So to kick things off, I'm very happy that we have with us Rahul Sengupta from UNDRR, who's going to be speaking about the Sendai Framework Monitoring and the Global Framework for Disaster-Related Statistics. So Rahul's kindly offered to join us today, despite UNDRR also hosting a big event in Bonn, and we're very grateful that he's been able to do that. So over to you, Rahul.
Thank you so much, Richard. If you can just let me know that you can see my shared screen.
Yes, yeah, we can see it. You're not in presentation mode yet, but we can see the screen. Perfect.
You can see it, right?
Yes.
Just 1 second, sorry. I mean, I'm not on video, but that's all right, I guess. It's fine. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much, Richard, for the welcome.
Thank you.
I'm very, very grateful to ESCAP and UNAP for inviting us, UNDRR, to give this a small presentation to you on the monitoring and the disaster-related statistics of the monitoring of the Sendai framework and disaster statistics. So starting with the Sendai framework monitoring, let me just give you a bit of a background. My colleague, Mr. Animesh Kumar would have spoken yesterday, or you would have seen a recorded presentation yesterday, giving the overall kind of background on the Sendai framework itself and how it's feeding into different processes. So let me just start off from there. So there's been 30 years of disaster and climate governance. I'm focusing on disaster. In the 80s and 90s, we had the International Decade for Natural Disaster Reduction. Actually, I just wanted to point out, now we are moving away from the terminology of natural disasters totally. What we want to say is disasters caused by natural hazards, because our strong belief is that there are no disasters are not natural. It's the coping capacities that make it a disaster when hazards impact us. Then we have the
hello. Hi, Rahul. Sorry to interrupt you. Our interpreters have just asked whether you're able to turn the camera on at all? And if you have
Okay.
a microphone that you
Yeah.
can use.
Sure. That helps. I didn't think my face would make much of a difference to my presentation.
That's good. Thank you.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, I just have the screen on the other screen, so maybe if I'm not looking into the camera, it's that's the reason. So thank you so much, Vijay. So we had the Yokohama strategy for strategy and plan of action in 1994. Then in 1999, we had the International Strategy for Disaster Reduction set up, which eventually became the Union Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. In 2005, as many of you would know, that the predecessor of the Sendai framework was agreed upon, which was called the Hugo Framework for Action, period 2005 to 15. And then the Sendai framework came along, right, in well aligned with the international development, the 2030 Agenda for International Development and the Paris Agreement, all in the year 2015. So moving on. So to focus, my focus of my presentation, of course, would be on the monitoring of the Sendai framework, which is where the disaster risk statistics link in. So this framework has one goal of reducing hazard, exposure, vulnerability, and increasing preparedness, all in terms of building resilience. There are 4 priorities of action: understanding risk, strengthening risk governance, investing for resilience, and enhancing preparedness and recovery. Now, these have been translated into 7 targets, which is the new thing. The Hugo framework also had 5 priorities, but we didn't have targets agreed through an UNGA resolution. So these are the 7 targets, which subsequently also had 38 indicators aligned to it, against which the governments are reporting. So the 7 targets, briefly to mention, about disaster mortality.
أولها يتعلق
disaster mortality per 100,000 persons. Target B is about affected people, how to lower to aim to lower the affected people, and affected people are defined in the Sendai framework. The monitoring for monitoring purposes are by those who are ill or injured by disasters, those whose houses are damaged or destroyed, and those whose livelihoods are disrupted. Then moving on to target C, which is about direct, and I want to emphasize direct economic loss, because this is the first time that this data has been formally collected through the official processes. So it wasn't made in order to make it a bit simpler for the countries. The focus was on direct economic losses from disasters as a proportion of the global gross domestic product, GDP. The target D, which is about the damage to critical infrastructure and disruption of services. So all these, as you can see, are with the arrows, downward arrows, which means they were all towards reducing these 4 types of losses. Then there are 3 other targets. One was to increase the countries with national and local strategies, which had initially a target of 2020 to as much as possible. The countries were expected to reach that. Second, then it was the international cooperation in terms of how many countries, the donors providing support in terms of ODA, but also not just ODA, in terms of other programs and initiatives that the countries are supporting, and it also includes the South-South cooperation among the countries. Last but not least, the multi-hazard early warning systems. So there is a target dedicated to how the early warning systems are being set up and maintained by countries, and also a particular indicator on preemptive evacuation as following an early warning. So these are the 7 targets. Quickly move on. So to give you a brief structure of this, so as you said, so there is the 7 targets, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, as I mentioned. The letters below that, A1 to A3, B1 to B5, are signifying the indicators, so that it will be a total of 38 indicators. And then, as I mentioned, that it's sitting on a goal of, we have the goal that I mentioned earlier, and building on 5 risk drivers, which are urban, environmental, social, governance, and climate change. And again, but we already mentioned the 4 priorities of the Sendai framework. So moving on. This is one system, just to mention, that countries have been working on in support of building disaster loss accounting systems. And why is that? This has been about more than 25 years now. However, the good practice for this has been that the disaster losses that have been tracked through this disaster system has been able to provide data for the targets A to D, as you remember, about mortality, economic losses, affected people, and injured and infrastructure affected to infrastructure and disruption of services. Those losses were primarily countries were being able to provide that data through this process of disaster loss tracking. So just mention that. Now I'll quickly move on in the essence of time to the hazard classification, as I've been asked to share. So in 2020, over 2019, the work started earlier 2019, but in 2020, the International Science Council and UNDRR, along with a host of very, very large number of organizations coordinated by the UK Health Security Agency, which was previously called the Public Health England, took this immense, let's say, an initiative of developing a hazard classification review. This led to a classification of 302 hazards, which is quite phenomenal, which was classified into these 8 categories that are geohazards, chemical hazards, environmental hazards, extraterrestrial hazards, societal hazards, biological hazards, and hydrometeorological hazards. So as you can see, and of course the pie chart kind of gives you a flavor of how many particular hazards were categorized under these types of hazards. So this has been a major initiative, and again, the UK Health Security Agency, under the aegis of the ECE, that's the Economic Commission of Europe, has taken on itself to support a project which is taking this to the national statistical organizations to help the standardization of this so that it can be used in statistical processes. So this is that is an ongoing process. For that particular initiative, the hazards themselves have been prepared. The 302 hazards have been profiles for each of the 302 hazards have been created, and all this is available on the websites of International Science Council and of UNDRR, where you will see a very, very phenomenal amount of information that's there on these 302 hazards. Though this is not part of the UNGA resolution, which has terminologies developed along with the indicators that I mentioned. However, this is a very kind of consultative, peer-reviewed scientific process, undergoing of a scientific process, of course, coordinated by the International Science Council, and hence it is being used quite extensively by different organizations. So please feel free to have a look at it and see how it can help you in your work. And then to move on quickly to the disaster-related statistics, I'll not go into too much detail on this, but give you a good overview. So disaster statistics, again, a lot of credit goes to actually ESCAP on this, because they have really worked, and as you would know about the disaster-related statistics framework that ESCAP established even before the Sendai framework had come out. So in a broad terms, these are the elements that are covered under disaster statistics: the national, regional, local risk assessments, the post-disaster, so risk assessments more pre-disaster, then the post-disaster assessments, and then the disaster response and civil protection, as you know, is search and rescue and all, which remains the most important part of the disaster management community. But the disaster statistics feeds into all of them. And this is where the ESCAP has done a phenomenal work in bringing the disaster management agencies and the national statistics officers together on this. I've literally got like a couple of slides just to give you the UN Statistical Commission has now given the mandate to the UN Statistical Division, UN ESCAP, and all the regional commissions along with UNDRR to develop a common framework for disaster statistics, for which an interagency expert group has been set up. And I'll not go into all of them, but there's been a number of steps that has been undertaken with the last the engagement in the UN Stats Commission of in 2023. So there's been and that's been the main purpose of this formal process, is to eventually develop a statistical framework, a common statistical framework, for which already issue papers on areas like economic losses, environmental losses, and disaster risk reduction expenditure counting has been developed, and this is an ongoing process. So I'll stop here with this work of the interagency expert group with support. I mean, the hosted by this event that is being hosted by ESCAP. I'm sure you'll be hearing about it a number of times. So I wanted to pitch in my 2 bits to it, that please and promote this, that this is a very important event that ESCAP is organizing, and we are all partners to this. So please see if you can either be with us in Bangkok, or please join us online on the 5th to 7th, and then on the 8th and 9th we have associated events. So thank you so much for your time. I hope I could cover some of the expected areas. Thanks.
Okay, no, thank you very much, Rahul. I think that was a really great presentation to kick things off. And thank you for kind of mentioning kind of the work that ESCAP have been doing in this area. And I think that actually leads very nicely to kind of our next presenter, kind of my colleague Piyapat Nakonchai, who is she's going to introduce for us the Disaster Related Statistics Framework, or DRSF. So Kunpor, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rishad. Let me find sorry, just try to make it a presentation mode here. Oops. Can you confirm that it's in a presentation mode? Okay,
yes,
I think it is. Thank you. Thank you very much, Rishad. And yeah, I'm Piyapat Nakonchai from ESCAP Statistics Division. First of all, I would like to thank Rahul for mentioning the framework, as well as promoting that expert forum. Today I will be covering the disaster-related statistic framework, as Rishad mentioned. And right, okay. Right. So I will call it as DRSF to shorten it a little bit. And actually, I think some of you here may be familiar with this framework, but for those who not, so like let me share with you what it's all about here. So first of all, let's right. Okay. Let's look into why we need improve disaster information. Basically, like we learn, like actually from the previous presentation from Rahul, like we actually really need evidence-based ERR, like to strengthen our activity in this area, right? So basically, improved statistics would help produce evidence for this, and it's actually that in country, like when we have agencies collecting data, like these practices in compilation of data and statistics do not always align. Like it sometimes comes in diverse format, and involve many different institutions and agencies, and quite numbers of times, like these agencies do not really coordinate it, so it could be a little bit challenging. So that's why, like when we have a statistical framework, which kind of guide us a little bit to in terms of the compilation, it would help us improve the national database on disaster risk and disaster impact. And actually, such framework would allow data and statistics to be harmonized, to be comparable and consistent within and across countries. It actually also helped bridging between disaster and risk management information with the socio-economic statistics. And with such organized data and statistics, we can use them for risk management planning and post-disaster assessment. And it also can be used for compilation of indicator as well as to form part of integrated sustainable development in the countries. And what are disaster related statistics? And if I may, like I would chart it to DRS for easier to pronounce for me as well. So basically, when we look at this disaster risk, disaster management cycle, you could see different phases, right? Ranging from the disaster, when the disaster strike, when we try to respond, when we try to recover and understand the risk better here. So you can imagine that like we're able to collect a broad range of information and data. And if we compile them, like put them together, analyze and interpret them, we would have meaningful statistics that could be used to inform risk, to help inform risk development, right? Like such as what's shown here, like the occurrence statistics, impact statistics, or risk statistics, as well as disaster risk expenditure statistics. And actually, what constitutes the DRSF? Actually, I forgot to mention that this DRSF framework is actually developed by a working group on disaster related statistics in Asia and the Pacific, and it's a long work, as Raul mentioned. It's quite numbers of years of work, and yeah, like we come up to this point and hope that this framework would be useful for all. So what about it then? It's actually, if we look at these boxes, there are components of the DRSF, and like these boxes are actually like they represent kind of a useful way to broadly organize basic range of disaster related statistics. And actually, like there are data that could appear in many boxes because they have multiple uses. So basically, like it could be covered under different components. So as such, like it would be useful that we have a centralized database that could allow us to understand the relationship between these components, actually. And the overview of the DRSF, it's actually like a set of internally and internationally consistent guidelines, and which will help us develop a common and standardized basic range of disaster-related statistics. And it actually also integrates data, metadata that help us to produce relevance information and numbers of time, like these information kind of like dispersed like in different agencies, right? So it could be that it could be useful when we look into this framework. The guidebook is also it actually also provide kind of a reporting table that actually this table could be customized as well to the national context, of course, and it actually allow us to compile the data in a meaningful way. And it actually the framework also includes some kind of good practice and provide some basic trainings, include materials including the GIS used in DRR and sorry, disaster related statistics integration. And if you want to learn more, you can click here to visit the DRSF. And we also have an e-learning on the DRSF as well in various languages, in Russian, in Arabic, and so on. Here are the list of the DRSF table, which I'm not going to go through, but if you click the link in earlier slide, like it would guide you to this, and you can download that. So and what are the use of this DRS actually? So if we look into again like this diagram, like you could see that when we have some kind of emergency occur, right? So if we have like lots of information on various occurrence, like we could use them like like analyze them and use them to improve our risk profiles, like right here. Yeah. And when we look in terms of the impact statistic, actually, in general, it's kind of like it captured the population that affected by a specific disaster, right? But if we have like the time series and disaggregation of information and statistic on human impact, including the material impacts as well, it will actually allow us to observe the trend and understand like who are the most affected area and actually, affected population group, and actually like this would just simply mirror who are the vulnerables in your society, and this would just simply, as I mentioned earlier, it would some data would be used in the could appear in different components. So such vulnerable information on vulnerables could appear here in the risk statistics as well, and we could compile them before a disaster strike to understand and plan better to cope with this disaster better, right? And at the bottom here, we do have like information on disaster risk reduction in general, right? And when we try to zoom into the expenditure part of the DRR, these DRR activities, we would understand how a society like invests in boosting their capacity in terms of to handle and cope with disaster. And then like if we look into some example that when we try to use this statistic for DRR decision making, right? We could, for example, when we want to try to make sure that new development doesn't really exacerbate existing risk, for example, we could try to use the demographic statistic to understand like the guide policy for vulnerable groups as well. And we could also try to use update risk profile to better understand the investment of risk reduction measures by using statistic on underlying factors on environmental degradation, for example. Richard, I see you appear, so I guess I'm running out of time a little bit, right? Okay, so I'm cutting short here. So here's some information, like the slide will be available on the website. So like here's some information just in more detail. Like if we look, for example, in a risk assessment, we would have we could use the population density by location or characteristic of dwelling, summarize them using the RSF table, for example, and we could use them to monitor the risk indices. And we have like a few more other example, like exposure to hazard, vulnerability, and so on. And actually, like you could see that this is a kind of the sources of information to compile in these tables from many agencies. So actually, like we would encourage to use this CRSF as a starting point so that you could explore where you could source this information from in your countries and start to reach out to those agencies and work with them. Yeah. And that's pretty much it for me. Thank you very much, Richard. And sorry if I go a little bit over time.
No, that was great. So no, thank you very much, Kim Board. I think that was a kind of wonderful presentation, kind of which really helps kind of build on what we heard before from Rahul. So we're coming now to kind of our final presentation before we go to Q&A. We're going to be hearing from Michael Nagy from UNECE about their work on measuring hazardous events and disasters, in particular their set of core disaster risk related indicators. So over to you, Michael.
Richard, can you confirm you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you very much, because I didn't have a chance to test. Yeah, so thank you very much for the invitation. And also sorry for a bit time constraints that I have, because I'm organizing another meeting today. I'm sitting here in a massive meeting room in Geneva, and we start a meeting in 1 hour. Yeah, so what I'm going to present, I think, adds very nicely on to what Rahul and Por already have presented. And this is the work of UNECE and our task force on measuring hazardous events and disasters, with a focus on the development of a set of so-called core disaster risk related indicators. So trying to, yeah, sorry. Having troubles to move the slides. Yeah. So yeah, so this CS task force, which CS stands for Conference of European Statisticians, Task Force on Measuring Hazardous Events and Disasters, was actually set up in 2015 and has a renewed terms of reference since 2020. And just to explain, the Conference of European Statisticians is our parental body here in EC Statistics, actually consisting of the chief statisticians of our region and defining our mandates and work. And the main objectives of this expert group that we have set up is to support the statistical operationalization of terms, definitions, and classifications used in disaster risk management. Of course, this links very much into the SENDA framework. Then a development of a set of core statistics indicators for the so-called CS region, and this is what I'm going to focus on, to draft implementation guidelines and also to organize expert fora and other platforms for the exchange of knowledge and experience in close collaboration with the interagency expert group and disaster-related statistics and other partners. So for example, we are also collaborating in the organization of the next expert forum that was already introduced by Rahul. So one tangible outcome of the work of this expert group was the so-called or other so-called recommendations on the role of official statistics in measuring hazardous events and disasters. This document was adopted by the conference in June 2019 and shortly after published. And what is important to say here, this is absolutely complementary to the work of the ESCAP disaster-related statistics framework that was just presented by Por. So it adds on by clarifying the role of national statistical offices and national statistical systems in providing information related to hazardous events and disasters. It identifies practical steps to better support disaster risk management efforts in coordination with other national agencies that are in charge of disaster risk management. And we also identified important follow-up activities. And also very interesting are the 11 national examples that are included in this. So the status of work of the development of this core disaster related indicators is that we have finalized this work, but now there is an ongoing electronic consultation with members of the CS with a deadline of 6th of May. And if there are not substantive objections, we submit this to the conference in June 23, and we hope that this can then be endorsed by the conference, and the follow-up work will be on the identifying core statistics. And when I'm talking now very briefly about this core set of indicators and also explain what the purpose is, it's very important to understand it's not developed in a silo, but it builds upon other global and regional work, such as the ESCAP disaster-related statistics framework, but also the CS recommendations that I just mentioned. It takes into account the global set of climate change statistics indicators, indicators of the Sustainable Development Goals, and also the SENDA framework, amongst other indicator frameworks. So what is the purpose of this set of core disaster risk related indicators? So there are many benefits for countries by implementing these recommended indicators. It's not mandatory, it's just a kind of checklist and should guide countries in developing national indicator sets. But first of all, it strengthens evidence for disaster risk. If they're regularly produced and disseminated by all national statistical systems, they are also internationally comparable. Then, of course, they support monitoring and reporting against international policy agreements, because many of the proposed indicators actually come from these existing frameworks. It's also useful in terms of ensuring consistency and coherence of information across administrative boundaries on the national and subnational level. So what we have learned from countries is that often disaster-related information produced on the subnational level is not necessarily fully comparable and coherent with the information that we have on the national level. So it's the idea is also to have something that is coherent on all levels, and so on. So as I said, the conceptual foundation for the selection of indicators is the disaster-related statistics framework. I think I don't need to further explain this after the very good presentation of Por. And the selection criteria for these indicators were, of course, relevance for our region, or for most countries in our region. the availability of a sound methodology, data availability, and to the extent possible, maximum extent possible, to use indicators from existing global or regional indicator frameworks, as I just mentioned earlier. Of course, it's very difficult that always all these criteria apply. So the criteria of relevance was considered as the most important one. So in some cases, it happened that we chose a relevant indicator where further methodological development might be needed. So I think this is now the very interesting part of the three main dimensions of the indicator framework, because it's a very nice add-on to the existing disaster-related statistics framework. So in the indicator framework that we have chosen, one dimension is the types of hazards, of course. And here we make a reference to the UNDRR ISC hazard classification that was, I think, mentioned by Rahul in his presentation. And for the selection of the indicators, we had a focus on main hazards for which we can expect that monitoring systems are generally available. And you see the list here. So this is climate change related indicators, geohazards, environmental hazards, biological hazards, and chemical and technological hazards as far as monitoring systems are available. But this should not prevent us from further developing this list of indicators later on. This is just to have something practical to start with. And then, of course, the elements of the disaster-related statistics framework, the second dimension of the indicator framework. So the frequency and dimension of hazardous events, then the elements that define disaster risk, which is exposure, vulnerability, and coping capacity, then the disaster risk reduction activities, and of course, the disaster impacts. And the third dimension, this is the new element that we have added to the disaster-related statistics framework, is to identify a group of elements of risk at risk. And you see the list here. So this is people, housing, basic services, critical infrastructure, and so on and so on. Also healthcare, cultural heritage, and governance. So this was a very good guidance into identify indicators that are really helpful in showing all the elements of the disaster-related statistics framework for these elements at risk. So what does it mean in practice? We have also made a distinction between core indicators and complementary indicators. So core indicators are really those small set of indicators recommended for implementation by all countries. They can prioritize according to prevailing hazards in the countries, the level of disaster risk for known hazards, and also the capacity to produce the underlying statistics in the short, mid, and long term. And we also applied here a tiering system that you are familiar with from the SDG indicators. And then the second group of indicators are complementary indicators. These are many, many more. And the idea is that these indicators accompany or complement the message conveyed by the so-called core indicators by providing additional details, which might be more specific for the country that develops this indicator list or this national indicator framework. This is the current presentation of the indicators and the main characteristics. This is in form of a table. So this is grouped into the elements of the disaster-related statistics framework. And you see here in the different columns. So the first one is simply a unique ID. This is a consecutive number, the name of the indicator, then which elements at risk are described or measured by this indicator, some comments, the tiering, the methodology, and also where this indicator comes from. I see Richard appearing here. I will finish very briefly. So we have 53 core indicators identified for the time being. I just give you a short idea what indicators we have identified here for each of the elements of the disaster-related statistics framework. I'm not reading them out, you can read them. But also I think it's important to mention that for the indirect impacts, this is really a difficult area. We defined this as an important area for research, and maybe this is something for the IAG to work on in the near future. Next steps is identification of core statistics that can be used to produce the indicators, but also which should be implemented by countries in our region with priority. And here we refer a lot back to the work of ESCAP, to the basic range of statistics, but we might narrow it down a little bit for our region supporting countries in developing the indicators, continuous exchange of knowledge and experience, and the development of implementation guidelines. Sorry for rushing through this. This is a lot of things that I could present, but yeah, I leave it here. And if there are any questions, of course, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you very much, Richard. Back to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Michael. It's another very informative presentation, and I think it's really good across those 3 presentations, seeing how the work of UNDRR, ESCAP, and UNEC all joins up and complements each other. I think that's great to see. So I'm going to open the floor for questions now. So please either post your questions in the chat or put your hands up. Actually, I see we've got one question in the chat already, asking what are the differences between FDES 2013 and the DRSF. So sure, if Paul, if you'd be able to respond to that.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much,
you.
Richard, and thank you very much to, I believe it's from Suki, for the question. Actually, how the tables in the DRSF organize the data, it's actually similar to the FDES, the extreme event component, but it's kind of refined into the different level of risk, help us to kind of divide information into, for example, different social group. It's kind of like a similar way, but a refined ways of reporting, which will allow us to later pull out different bits for disaggregation for different use. Yeah, but in general, it's similar. Yeah, that's just an organizing table. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much,
Yeah.
Paul.
If I, Richard, if I may build on Kun Paul's response, is that okay?
You certainly can, Tirapong.
Thank you, Richard. And thanks for a very good question. And Kun Paul is absolutely right. I may also add that if we look at the FDS 2013 in the component 3.4 on hazardous events and disasters, they focus particularly on what I would consider disaster statistics. But if we look at the DRSF, we are talking about a much broader range of information, including this disaster reduction expenditure, hazard exposure information, number of days that people lost their absence from schools, lost their job. So that's why we call it disaster related statistics. So it's much broader range that are relevant for DRR planning and policy making purposes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Tirapong. I think that's very helpful. So we've got a couple more questions coming in the chat. I think one from Naira, in Armenia, asking about persons in refugee-like situation, and then another question about which of the indicators more difficult, and perhaps more importantly, where's the easiest place to start, or where's the best place to start? So Michael, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I think that goes to me. So thank you very much for this very good questions. First to Naira from Armstad. I don't have the list of indicators now in front of me, but yes, there is at least one indicator related to migration and movements because of disaster situations. I can give you more information later on. I will share this with the organizers, and maybe you can put this then and distribute it to participants. But yes, there is something. And then from the Emirates, the question, which of the indicators were most difficult to calculate and which is the easy one to start with? I would say as a recommendations to countries, first of all, there is no recipe that fits all because it depends a little bit on your national situation. And I think what you have to take into consideration, first of all, what is relevant for your country. So what are the prevailing hazards in your country? I think this is the first thing that you have to think about. The second thing is, of course, for which of the indicators are internationally compared methodologies available? And the third issue is for which can you provide data? And when you look at the set of indicators, and I can share the document and maybe also through you, Richard, with everyone. So then, but again, this is a kind of draft document which is under consultation process now. You will see that many of the indicators actually refer to existing indicator frameworks. So I was mentioning the Center Framework indicators, SDG indicators, and most of them are tier 1 indicators. So meaning tier 1 in SDG means there's actually a sound methodology available, and most of the countries are in a situation or can be expected in a situation of produce the data. So my recommendation would be to use this as low-hanging fruits, but then really add on information where you say, maybe this is something missing for my national purposes, because this set should really help the countries. This is not for international use. This is really something that should be helpful for countries. My experience when I worked with countries in the past was like to set up an expert workshop involving all the stakeholders, going through this list of recommended indicators, and then to pick those where it's most likely to start with, and then to develop a kind of roadmap, implementation roadmap for these indicators. I hope this answers the question from the colleague from the Emirates. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. I think that's very important, what you said there, about focusing on the national user priorities, and using that as a strong guide for your focus. So I think it's now time for us to move to our next bit of the agenda. So in this next segment, we're going to hear about geospatially enabling disaster-related statistics. We've got a presentation from Claudio Stenner from IBGE Brazil, who's also the co-chair of the expert group on the integration of statistical and geospatial information. And he's going to be introducing the Global Statistical Geospatial Framework, or GSGF. Now, given the time differences, Claudio is unable to join us in person, so he has sent a pre-recorded presentation, which we're going to share with you now. We seem to be having a little bit of a problem with sound.
Sorry, let me try to reshare that again.
Good afternoon, good evening. My name is Claudio Stenner. I am a co-chair of the expert group on integration of statistical and geospatial information, and also a director of geoscience of Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, IBGE. I will talk with you today about the integration of statistical and geospatial information in the context of the climate change and related disaster statistics. I will share my screen with you. Just a second. Yes. So what you see in the screen is the SDG indicators, indicators that you see in red, a serious gap of information. And to fill these gaps, we need the geospatial information. And also, we need the geospatial information in order to leave no one behind. because to leave no one behind, you have to know where is the gap, is the problem, in order to allow action to solve the problem. This is a set of fundamental geospatial data teams. These teams are a base to the integration of geospatial statistic information. We need this to support the integration. And when we talk about climate change and related statistics, this is themes that are very important to this kind of analysis itself. For example, to mapping the people are at risk of flooding or landslides, we need the elevation and the data. We need also to know about the population distribution. We need the information about the address. We need the information about geology and soils. We need information about the land cover and land use. And all this information, you can do the crossing. You can cross all these themes in order to producing new knowledgement, in order to identify patterns, in order to planning actions to improve life quality, to reduce the risk of people. The geographic coverage is recognized by the high level of the United Nations, and also the necessity of geographic disaggregation. We need more geographic disaggregated data to improve the life of our human beings in our planet. This only a context information about the mandates for ECOSOC, the Economic and Social Council by the United Nations, and also about the expert group itself. I keep the slides here only to information, and about the mandate provided by the Statistical Commission and the UN GIM to this expert group. We report to both bodies, from the statistical and the geospatial body. We are the bridge between these two communities. The work of the expert group started in 2013. In 2017, the Global Geospatial Framework was endorsed. In 2019, this framework was adopted. And in 2022, the GSGF implementation guide was endorsed. As I said before, we are the bridge between different communities, and in order to put the statistical and geospatial information together. This is the GSGF itself. It's based on 5 principles. The first one talking about the necessity of production statistics based on lat-long information, and the second one is talking about to keep this information in environments that protect the confidentiality and allow aggregations in very diverse geographies. The principle 3 talking about the necessity to keep a set of common geographies to analyze and to produce statistics. The principle 4 talking about the necessity of statistical and geospatial interoperability, and principle 5 talking about the accessibility and the usability needs. I will go direct to the resource that we already have available. So this is the publication of the Global Statistical Spatial Framework itself. It's a 46-page document available in 6 languages: English, Spanish, French, Portuguese, Mandarin, and Arabic. This document has all the principles and explain how you can integrate these principles. But we have also a more detailed document, a 149-page document that's detailing the implementation of the GSTF, and also including a 30 national level experience. That's that's a very rich document that's available only in English. So let's talk a little bit more about the GSTF implementation and its implementation guide. Talking about geocoding. Geocoding means to put all the information preferentially in lat-long coordinates and link them to the records, to the statistical information itself. And this also geocoding is performed in individual statistical units records. It's lat-long information or address. It can be aggregated into large geographic units like states, provinces, municipalities, neighborhoods, and much more. Such these statistical units records are then ready for further application, such as methodology to ensure confidentiality even in a small area data disclosure. Confidentiality is a huge concern that this group have, but they have also recognized the necessity to disclose statistical information in a small geographies. We have to talk also about that all statistical units reports should be included or be linked to precise geographic reference, lat-long information. But if it's not, the smallest geographic areas possible, for example, census tracts. The common geographies are also very, very, very important because the set of common geographies allow to integrate different sources of information in the same geography, for example, census data, administrative data, health data, and much more. So maintain these common geographies is a key factor to an integration between statistical and geospatial information. And you have two main types of common geographies. First one is administrative geographies. We're talking about municipalities, districts, electoral districts, political regions, official regions, health regions, and much more. Generally, these kind of geographies are defined by law. But sometimes you need to create another set of geographies that we call statistical geographies or geostatistical geographies. These kind of geographies, for example, such as unofficial matter regions, statistical grids, and other small areas for disseminations and analysis, the information, the statistical information. That's an example of Brazil, a set of the administrative geographies of Brazil. We use these geographies in all statistics that IBG disseminates. That's an example of Brazilian statistical geographies that we use also in the disseminations of all our statistical production. So the interoperability is also very, very, very important, and the implementation guide provides some guidance and how to avoid data disclosure pitfalls, like to identify disclosure. It's maybe a problem. Refuse to find the direct identifier of a statistical unit from the data, for example, name of address. Other pitfall is to disclosure refers to revealing association between the statistical unit and its sensitive features. And other inferential disclosure refers to inferring some attributes with high confidence levels, while decreasing confidence level is a desirable outcome for statistical data users. The GSTF work together with the IGIF, the Integrated Geospatial Information Framework, I do not talk in detail here, keep this just for reference. I'd like to show you a Brazilian national experience of Brazil and how we integrate census data with areas at risk of landslides or flooding in Brazil. With this work, we produced a number of population and also a set of characterization of this population that lives in this condition in areas at risk of landslides or flooding in Brazil. But sometimes it's not a direct work. In this case, you have these different types of geometry, and this geometry sometimes not comfortable. Census features has some characteristics, and the areas at risk has other characteristics. So you need to create a new geography, a new common geography that you call it Bater. The Bater is the smallest possible area resulting from the intersection of risk areas with the census features that are most adherent to objectives of the work. And you can show this on the map. On the red, it's possible to see the risk areas. On the orange, it's possible to see the space that we blocked from census, and how to compatibilize these different kinds of geometry. You create another geometry in green that you call it Bater, and you put the statistical data from census in these polygons that are very adherent to the risk areas polygon. But with 2022 census data, the work will be much easier because we have all the households geocoded by lat long. So what we will have to do is just to do an intersection operation between the risk areas and the household coordinates to produce a much better statistics from the population that lives in areas at risk of landslides or flooding in Brazil. And to finish, some reflections about the possible benefits of implementing the GSTF to climate change and disaster-related statistics. First, the possibility of producing much more accurate statistics for populations affected by climate change or subject to natural disaster, with guarantee of confidentiality, as an example of the Brazil experience that I showed before. Second, the possibility of generating statistics more adherent to the needs of decision makers. Because if you have statistics closer in small geography, it's much better to decision makers. Third, the possibility of integration and intersection between different data sources, such as demographic census, soil mapping, geological mapping, rainfall data, etc. And also the presentation of statistics in a friendly way using interactive maps in a web interface. And finally, the possibility of creating new knowledge by crossing different teams in the territory and with the using of spatial analysis too. That's it that I want to talk with you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here in this event, and thank you again. Bye bye.
Okay, thank you very much. So kind of so on the GSGF is obviously an incredibly important tool for bringing together the statistical and geospatial worlds, as Claudio's just explained, which means it's of course vital for areas such as disaster-related statistics. We had hoped to hear now from Michelle Edwards, who's from ODPEM in Jamaica, also co-chair of the working group on geospatial information and services for disasters. Michelle is hoping to present on the strategic framework for geospatial information and services for disasters, which would have built on what we've just heard from Claudio. But unfortunately, Michelle has experienced some technical difficulties, which means she's not going to be able to join us. We will, however, share a copy of her presentation with the materials from the webinar so that you can learn more about that framework. I think Michelle's presentation also includes some information on the work that they're doing in this area on at disaster statistics in Jamaica. We are going to get the opportunity now to hear from some countries. You'll be very glad to know. We're going to hear first from Naira Mandalian from the Statistical Committee of the Republic of Armenia, who's going to be speaking about disaster-related statistics in Armenia from data collection to publication. So if you're ready, we'll hand over to you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I want to introduce myself. I am statistician, environmental statistician from Statistical Committee of Armenia. And to be honest, this is my first presentation on this theme, disaster-related statistics. But I'll try to, do you see my screen?
Yes, you do.
Oh, thank you. So I'll try to introduce the whole publication, all the publications that we have, the information that we have on emergency events. I'll start with the geography. Where is Armenia situated? It is situated in the western part of Asia. The country is landlocked, as you see, and occupies the northeastern part of Armenian Plateau between Caucasus and Near East Asia. The inter-river territory between middle flows of Kur and Darax rivers. It borders with Georgia, Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Iran. The country's area comprises approximately 29,000 kilometers square, and 36.4 area are mountain. The highest elevation of the country is Peak Aragat mountain, 4,000 meters, and the Earth's lowest point, the underflow region of Debet River, Kenya. 375 meters. The longest extension from northwest to southeast is 360 kilometers, and from west to east, 200 kilometers. So as you see, it's a small country. But Armenia is located in a highly seismically active zone where strong earthquakes occur regularly. So you see here pictures from Spitak earthquake that occurs in 1988, and many people were killed and injured. So Armenia has 7 climatic zones. That's why the flora is unique and diverse. Although the territory of Armenia is small, its flora is distinguished with richness and variety. In each 1,000 kilometers square of area, Armenia, approximately 107 plant species grow, and regularly many new species appear in Armenia. These species are new not only in Armenia but in science in general. Here you can find almost all the species of the region. And there are 126 endemic plants, 10% of species of flora in Armenia are herbs. So, and 12% of flora is in the Red Book. You can find them in the Red Book. It's not good, but it is fact. So I'll now speak about the statistics for the emergency events. We have two main administrative registers as source. One of them is Ministry of Emergency Situations. Now they are going to reconstruct, and they will enter into the Ministry of Territorial Administration from June of this year. And the Road Police Service, we get information on traffic events, road events. Ministry of Emergency Situations, in some cases, they provide information they collect information from different sources. For example, on epidemic COVID-19, they get information from other sources and provide us with that data. These are our publications, books. We have monthly reports. We put this information. We have Armstat, where we put our books. And also now, as we hear from Michael, these new indicators will take place in our core indicator bank. It is Armstat Bank. Now you cannot see them there, but we are going to add these new indicators there. This is our book, and this is the SDG platform. There is a link. You can find all the SDG related to these disasters here. So I have collected to show the related information. Yes, mainly we get climate information from Hydrometeorological Center. These are monthly average air temperature and norms. You can see here for 2021. This is the latest publication, but in some months we'll put the information for 2022. And in comparison with the norm, here you can see the norm. And this is monthly precipitation and norms. You can see the change by months. And this is more interesting. You can see the long data series here, and apparently you see the temperature going high, and average precipitation going low. So these are heat waves for Yerevan city, again from 1961 to 21. You see here also increasing these days, number of days. About the emerging events, what do we publish related to this sphere? Yes, natural hazards, anthropogenic hazards, road traffic included here, and social biological emergency events. So this information we published by MARSIS. MARS, I want to just, in order for you to understand the scale of MARS, Armenia is divided into 11, has 11 MARSIS regions like. So this information is disaggregated on that level. And we put here number of casualties from registered emergency events by gender, dead, injured, evacuated, and rescued. Here you see the diagram for from 2017 to 2021. It is summarized in order to have a global view which main emergency hazards are general for Armenia. So choosing these 7 types. Here you see already by years the same hazards. And we see here that earthquakes became more frequent. And here you see the events caused by natural hazards. Casualties, that means that injured people from which hazard it was caused, and by years also. So the draft is the most common hazard for Armenia. And that's why this is an example that we publish in our book also by regions, valley, foothills, mountain, alpine, and by stations. These are the registered maps divided into 10 days. And the red, that means 1 is strong, very strong. And 5, that means the blue color, no draft that happened. So this information is very useful because we had feedback from our users, very useful information. So what about losses and damages? We do not publish any information on this about losses and damages. Why? Because it is challenge for us. Though once in 3 months we receive from the Ministry of Emergency Situations package of acts drawn by commissions. These commissions are organized on 3 levels. The first level on the community level, the second on Mars level, and the third is on the national level, yes, the government. So we get these acts directly from the community level, and these acts, these documents include information on the date of the disaster when it happened, and the date of adoption of this act, name of the disaster, cause damages. This is the most challenged part, where they provide information on how they assess it. It is challenged because they do not use international system. They provide information on land area or on buildings, units or meter square, and the assessment of losses, approximate in drams. And they give the total summarized, for example, yes, value of losses. And in order to have just a view, a picture, general picture on this information, I've prepared this diagram, though we do not publish it, but this is like a result of this summarized information. So you see here, but it is very interesting. It gives interesting picture, for example, for analysis. Though statistics, here in statistics, we do not make any analyzing, but just to make it, we see here the draft, the number, the registered number of this event. And you see here the money that was assessed and provided for support, yes, the assessed loss. So we see here that only in this case it is high. In the rest cases it is low. For example, strong wind, we have a lot of casual events, but the money is too, the assessed money is too small. So we have to get approval for this, for publication of this information. But this is what we have. That's why we need, it's a challenge to publish it.
Thanks, Nara. Can you start to draw things to a close now? That would be great. Thank you.
Yes, this is my last slide, the legal framework for NDC implementation, the international and the decision and decrees adopted by our government. So, and thank you with this great view. I'll close my presentation.
That is indeed a lovely view.
Yeah.
So I think that was very informative presentation. I think it's very helpful to see kind of both the data that you do have, kind of the trends that are there, as well as some of the challenges that you're facing in increasing the amount of data that are available. So thank you very much for sharing that. Actually, so I think we'd move now to kind of our next presentation. We're going to be hearing from Erkan Ersin from the Turkish Statistical Institute. Erkan's presentation in particular is going to focus on what Turkstat have done after the earthquake hit southern Turkey earlier this year. So thank you very much, Erkan.
Hello, everyone. I am Erkan Ersin. I am the head of Sectoral Statistics Department at Turkstat. First of all, thank you for giving this chance for sharing this presentation during this global webinar. Today, I will say something about our earthquakes that was happened in the beginning of the February. As you know, sorry, you are sharing the screen?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are, Erkan. Could you please guide us?
Next slide, please.
Okay.
Okay, then next slide, please. In my presentation, I will give some numbers about the earthquakes, and I will talk about the data compilation methods that we used and data we used. And lastly, I will say something about the visualization of the data that we used. Next slide, please. In these earthquakes, actually, we lost 15,000 people. I didn't write this to here more than 50,000 people. I didn't write this to here because after giving this number, the other numbers are become meaningless, and these two earthquakes are 7.7 and 7.6 in moment magnitude, and they are just there's just 9 hours between these major earthquakes. These earthquakes affected 11 provinces of the 11 provinces which are stated and in the southern side of the Turkey. 8 of them are metropolitan municipalities. Are actually they have some of them are very crowded. For example, Adana have more than 2.3 million people, and these 11 provinces has share in the Turkey's total population 16.7, and the population of them is about 14 million. And as Turkstat, we started to bunch together all the data to serve them to decision makers. Next slide, please. In this part, I will talk about the data compilation method that we used and which data we used. Next slide. We start with the data that we already have in our hands. These are the administrative records of the ministries. In Turkey, we have official statistics program, and according to this program, the ministries has to share, if you want, has to share their data with us. In these 8 data sets were played major role in our study. For example, Central Population and Administration System and Address Registration System data is the major players in these studies done after the earthquake. Of course, land registry records and registered employment data, payroll data, farm registration system, and livestock information system were very important for us. Next slide, please. We have also some auxiliary data sources, which are, as you can see, education database records, electricity and natural gas subscription records, higher education database records, motor vehicle registrations, building permit records, pensioner records, enterprise tax returns data, and disability records. These are also compiled by the ministries, but some of them are weekly, some of them are monthly, and some of them are yearly data. But after the earthquake happens, we turn back to the ministries and ask for the latest data. For example, motor vehicle registrations we get every month. It's a monthly data, and since the earthquake happened in the 6th of the February, we get the data for the first 5 days of the February again from the ministry. Next slide, please. With the data we get, we serve too many information to the institutions which they ask for. For example, for industry, Ministry of Industry, we gave too many data on structural economic variables, annual industry production, import debts and export receivables of the enterprises, and employment and issued invoices. For example, for these issued invoices, we get weekly data after the earthquake that to see that which enterprises start to work again. All of the ministries were asked for some data from us. Actually, the disaster data is under responsibility of the Disasters and Emergency Management Agency, but they do not have all these kind of data. So we try to serve these informations to the ministries. Next slide, please. The main focus of our study was having a trace of the residents of the region after the earthquake. For example, we take the placement in the student dorms from the Ministry of Education, Higher Education Agency. We get the data of placement to the hotels and hostels from the Ministry of Tourism. We get the data of departure from region by road, rail, maritime, and air transport from the Ministry of Transport. Also, we get data on aid under supportive payment per household in cash also. We get the last location positions of the mobile phones of subscribers of the mobile phones. We get data on the credit cards, where did they use lastly their credit cards. Of course, then we get data on the vehicles, that where did they get the fuel lastly. We get data from Ministry of Health if somebody resident of the earthquake region gets some health services in other cities, and we get damage evaluation and records at the region. This is a daily data. Or Ministry of Urbanization get data to us every day, and we look at the data statistically and serve them to the other ministries. Next slide, please. While we are using these data, we use hierarchical structures. This is how we use the data in hierarchical principle. Of course, all of these data are confidential data. We have all the Turkish ID numbers of the residents, but we couldn't use this data with these Turkish ID numbers directly. So in every study of our institution, we change this Turkish ID number to a statistical number, and then we start to use this data. In this hierarchical structure, by using this hierarchical structure, we try to see where is the residents of the earthquake region seen lastly. Next slide, please. And we try to visualize the data we get. We use a system based on GIS. In this data, in this system, we couldn't open it to the public, but we serve it to the ministries. For example, when you come to the Ankara, you can see from which cities residents came to Ankara and the number of it, and you can see from which data source we get a trace of this residents. Also, you can see how many people from the earthquake region are still seen in the same region or in other city of the earthquake region. You can see all of them, and our ministries were used this system very much. They like it very much, and they use it every day. They use it every day to give the up-to-date numbers to their decision makers. This is how we studied just after the earthquake happened in Turkey. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much indeed, Erkan, for sharing this information on the really important role that Turksat played in response to these devastating earthquakes. Thanks, incredibly powerful demonstration of how NSOs can act rapidly to provide information to policy and decision makers in an emergency situation. So we've got some time now to ask questions to kind of either Naira or Erkan, and so we will I kind of have a look at the chat as before, but please also raise your hands if you've got any questions that you'd like to kind of put to either of our presenters. Okay. So
I have a question to Erkan. May
I? Yes. Yeah. No, please go ahead.
The system that you showed was very, very interesting. And I have a question regarding the time when you started to work like that. Before earthquake, you had this system already, or after earthquake you start to manage this type of work?
Actually, the whole system was started just after the earthquake, because it was done just for the earthquake. But we get much of the data that I showed you before the earthquake also. So we are using this data to do our own job. But the system is started just after the earthquake.
Yes, because we also have this information, this data as statistical comment, but to join into one system and to make this kind of analyzing, it's rather another approach.
Yes.
That's why it was very interesting. Thank you.
Yes, actually, our disasters and emergency agency are working on this every time, but it's very new for us.
No, thank you, Erkan. And so just a quick follow-up question, kind of on that point. So kind of on the data that you brought together, kind of it was much of the same data that you were already receiving. I think you mentioned that you kind of increased the frequency of some of it, and kind of had daily deliveries of data in some cases from different ministries and agencies to give a up to the minute picture of how the situation was evolving. Is that right?
Yes, you are right. The frequency is getting higher, and we get the data, if possible, of course, every day.
Okay. So how did Turksat, how did you and your colleagues kind of coordinate to kind of put this response in place so quickly? Kind of, I assume, were there other activities that you were undertaking that needed to be put on hold in order to step up to this response?
Actually, in the top of this system, there is digital transformation office, and they coordinate us with the other ministries. We also every time getting together for the official statistics program. We work every time together with the ministries, but just for the earthquake, this digital transformation office is coordinating everything, and some of the data, for example, sometimes ministries do not want to share. We get this data by this digital transformation office. They helped us.
Okay, thank you. I think it's kind of very, very helpful. I know from my own background in National Statistical Office to kind of get these kind of insights and kind of learn from them. So do any other colleagues have questions that they would like to kind of put to kind of to our speakers? Okay, I'm not seeing any further questions for now. So I think perhaps if we take a short break now for everyone to stretch their legs, get a drink and go to the bathroom and so on. And just a reminder, it's very important that we finish our webinar session today kind of on time, particularly for our interpreters who are doing such a fantastic job. So I think if we take a 10-minute break now, and I ask that everyone is back no later than 7:50 GMT, so 10 minutes from now. Thank you very much.
Richard, somehow we cannot hear you. Still not.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm not quite sure what was going on there, but apologies. Hopefully the sound isn't too bad from the built-in microphone. So thank you everyone for returning promptly. We're now going to move into our final session of this webinar, focusing on some of the important ongoing global initiatives, as well as thinking about the way forward from here, particularly with regards to planned activities under this DA14 project. So our first item in this session is on statistics and practice with national adaptation plans. And we're going to hear from two speakers. First, from Jessica Troney from UNEP, followed by Benaya Parajuli, who is working on the National Adaptation Plan in Nepal. Will be able to provide a national perspective to what Jessica has to say. So over to you, Jessica. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall I share my screen then, or is the presentation with you? Okay, great. Okay, so let me introduce myself. My name's Jessica Troney. I work for the for UNEP in Nairobi. I'm the chief of the Climate Change Adaptation Unit in Ecosystems Division. So I've been asked to say a few words about what we know on environmental indicators and monitoring for national adaptation planning processes. So I'm going to give you a few slides to introduce you to our experience. Next slide, please. So just a word on national adaptation plans. Shall I move it? Okay, thanks. They're mandated by the UNFCCC in Decision 5CP7 from 2011. The objective of these national adaptation planning processes is to reduce vulnerability to the impacts of climate change by building adaptive capacity and resilience, and to facilitate the integration of climate change adaptation into national development planning processes and strategies. And there are three main principles attached to these. They should be continuous, progressive, and iterative. They should be country-driven, gender-sensitive, participatory, fully transparent, and based on and guided by the best available science. And by February 2024, there should be a global stocktake on formulating and implementing the NAPs. Most of these NAPs today are funded by the Green Climate Fund Readiness Programme. Next slide, please. And in UNEP, we are supporting some 19 countries now on national adaptation planning processes. There's the map. As I said, most of them are GCF funded. Next slide, please. Okay, so I thought the clearest way to illustrate the indicator monitoring issue was to highlight an example for you. This is the National Adaptation Plan in Nepal. That's the cover page. This was produced with UNEP's support as delivery partner. One of the priority programs is agriculture and food security, with a cost estimate of 11.2 billion USD to 2050. So basically over a 25-year horizon. And one of those priorities that was costed at 2 billion is the program on sustainable agriculture, food and nutrition security and climate resilient health and hygiene. And the three sub-priorities under that were promotional of nutritional security for healthier livelihoods, increasing crop production through adoption of climate resilient and sustainable agricultural practices, and developing energy efficient agricultural technology. So the question is, if you were to monitor progress against these sets of priorities, how would one do it? Next slide, please. Okay, so one of the things that we need to look at is where the vulnerability stems from. And again, this is from the NAP in Nepal. The background to this priority is this: vulnerability stems from rising temperatures, changes in precipitation, extreme weather events, but also a range of other socio-economic factors. That is, high reliance on small-scale rain-fed agriculture, dryland farming, increased incidence of pests and diseases, depleted grass and feed, heat stress, reduced appetite of livestock and reduced milk production, mortality of livestock, reduced arable land with flash floods and landslides, accelerated soil degradation, soil fertility, shortages of water for crop production, limited access to agricultural extension services, poverty levels, limited access to inputs and capital, out-migration of men, feminisation of agriculture, and the broad macroeconomic issue of agricultural GDP being impacted by about 2%. So you can see that there's a range of vulnerability factors, some climate change, but some are socioeconomic. Next slide, please. The slide before that. Okay, so how do we organise this kind of vulnerability picture into a set of indicators that can be measured? So first of all, we want to say, okay, well, what are the outcome indicators that we could establish based on the priorities in the NAP? One of them could be increase in agricultural production, productivity. These are observed, measurable indicators. But the other one, which is a little bit more complex, is reduced vulnerability. And this can be done through an index of indicators, a basket of indicators, or a perception-based qualitative indicator. And then you need to look at causality. Okay, so you might say that agricultural production has increased, but how would you know what caused that production? Is it your adaptation investments? And how would you know that it was anything to do with climate change expenditure? Okay, so first of all, you need to look at causality, the chain of events that have led to that outcome change. And the lower level indicators here could be things like access to extension services, access to inputs, to capital, uptake of climate resilient agricultural methods. When you're looking at ecosystem indicators, it could be soil carbon, it could be moisture content, it could be vegetation coverage on land, it could be river flows. But the basic point is that the indicator selection depends on the scale of the intervention and the time scale of measurement. So there is lots of evidence to show that investing in land cover can bring back, and in many cases does bring back, river flows, rivers that have dried up. But the time scale of measurement for that is going to be 5 years or longer. If you wanted to measure vulnerability reduction in the short term, maybe in a 1 to 5 year time frame, then maybe you need to be looking at soil carbon or access to extension services and such like. What I would put to you as members of the Statistical Bureau is that the indicators that are measured at the macro level would be of a limited number, showing national level changes, essentially showing the decoupling of loss and damage trends from weather trends over time. And this is really important because if you don't track the climate baseline, the precipitation baseline, the temperature baseline, and so on, then you can't know how effective adaptation at the national level is being. So that climate baseline is really essential to track, as well as the top level indicators that would track loss and damage. And then I would say that at the sector level, you would complement this national level tracking with deep dive analysis to understand causality, and essentially to understand where to put resources and to upscale effective interventions. Next slide, please. So I just thought this might be interesting for the audience. Why is adaptation so difficult to measure? And you know, it's evolved over the years, the decades. It's evolved from IPCC third assessment report, defining adaptation as adjustments in natural human systems in response to climatic stimuli, essentially highlighting adaptation as a process and an outcome, the process being better decision making, robust decision making. Moving on to the IPCC fifth assessment report, talking about risk being caused by climate hazards, exposure of people to the hazard and their vulnerability statement, essentially saying that vulnerability is multifaceted and that you need a basket of indicators to measure vulnerability and risk. But the basic point I would posit to you is two bullet points here. One is that you need to set the baseline and that you need to understand what your adaptation goal is. So in the first slide, I presented adaptation priorities in Nepal for the first program on agriculture and food security. And the second point that I would make is that vulnerability does come from various factors, as I presented in the second slide. So in measuring adaptation, it's about robust decision making, and that's what we're trying to do through the NAP processes. It's about measuring avoided losses from climate hazards. And it's also, and I think at the sector level, more about positive targets. How many water storage facilities? What's the coverage of extension services? How many people per extension officer, and so on. And of course, you know, vulnerability reduction could include good development work that addresses or transforms the underlying socioeconomic drivers of vulnerability and poverty. Next slide, please. This diagram may be familiar to you. It comes from IPCC Assessment Report 5. It basically says that risk and impacts, of course, are a function of the climate signal, the hazards, exposure of people to those hazards, and vulnerability, which encompasses the whole raft of factors leading to poverty. So, for example, if you're living in informal housing on the coast, very close to sea level, you know, to waves lapping at your house, then obviously sea level rise and storm surges are going to be impacting you with certainty. And then on the left, we've got the climate hazard that needs to be monitored. Underlying anthropogenic climate change are, of course, natural patterns of climate variability, but those natural patterns are being exacerbated by the human-induced signal. And then on the right there, you've got socioeconomic processes. So in other words, it's not correct to say that all of these impacts are due to climate change. We can do a lot to mitigate climate change impacts, to address vulnerability, to reduce vulnerability through our development process. And so that's basically the framework for a country understanding, okay, well, what can we do to reduce loss and damage? It needs to be on both sides, both in terms of the development pathway, as well as reducing exposure to climate change, and obviously mitigating climate emissions, which ultimately needs to happen. Next slide, please. Okay, so key takeaways. Coming from UNEP, of course, you know, we are concerned with raising awareness and understanding of the role of natural assets and the role that they play in the climate impact and risk chain. It's worth saying that 60% of ecosystem services and up to 70% of regulating services in nature are being degraded or used unsustainably. And so measuring and maintaining natural capital stocks is critical, and that's been reiterated in the IPCC 6th assessment report. The second point is that analysis of climate impact chains in different ecosystem contexts is necessary. They're going to be different. It's going to lead to the identification of different kinds of climate risks and different indicators of vulnerability. So one of the things that I will leave you with is that of the 231 SDG indicators, the question is, which are the most important for your country in terms of impact and risk chains caused by climate change? And then the third point is that climate baselines need to be tracked along with key development indicators in order to measure vulnerability reduction. So national statistic offices could start to track macro level indicators along with the climate baseline. For example, rainfall patterns and food production. And just a final word here, the 2021 Adaptation Gap Report did give a specific mention to the parlous state of M&E systems for adaptation. They mentioned that there's very scant evidence of risk reduction. It's not to say that there isn't, it's just that it's not being measured and there's the evidence isn't there. So this is really an area of work, an area of adaptation work that needs urgent attention. And last slide, just to raise your awareness about the materials that we have. We've developed some guidelines for integrating EBA into national adaptation plans. You can find those on our website. I think it's chapter 3 has sort of deep dives into how you assess climate risks, different methodologies. We have a web page on national adaptation plans, and we have lots of news stories. I've just cut and paste one there. Pakistan launching their national adaptation plan project in 2021. And so with that, I hope that was of interest, and you're always welcome to reach out to me for specific issues or information. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Jessica. So we now pass straight across to kind of Binaya, who shared a perspective from Nepal.
Thank you. Namaste, everyone. My name is Binaya Parazli, and I work at UNEP for Nepal NAP project based in Nepal. I'm given 5 minutes, so I'll just talk about what we are doing in terms of our work on establishing an automated monitoring and reviewing system in Nepal. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'll just talk. Nepal has recently completed its national adaptation plan and has now started working on establishing an automated MNR system for NAP implementation. And on this, we have already prepared a framework, an MNR framework, and got it approved by the government, along with the NAP summary for policymakers in 2021. Our NAP document has identified 64 adaptation interventions based on 9 thematic and 3 cross-cutting sectors identified by the National Climate Change Policy of 2019, as Jessica also shared it during her presentation about the thematic areas. Right now, being based on these thematic and cross-cutting sectors, we have started to work on developing smart indicators for our MNR system. We will develop output, outcomes, and impact level indicators for which we will be built on the existing indicators as much as possible after reviewing them. In Nepal, we've already existing MNR systems at the ministry and project level. For example, there is an information management system at National Planning Commission, different MNR system at project and ministry level at all 3 tiers of the government, that is provincial, local, and federal. So the data and information from these will be used to establish the NAP MNR system, including census, surveys, etc. And primary data collection will be done where there is a gap. The Nepal MNR system for adaptation will be linked to the MNE of other national priorities, notably the SDGs, the Sendai framework for DRR, National Development Plans, and NDC. So on our MRR framework that I said we've already gotten approved from the government, we have proposed climate change data management monitoring and reporting center. We call it CCDMMC, which after establishment will serve as a one-stop center for climate change related data and information. This will be at the federal level and will collect, analyze and avail the data and information from different sources. So there's no gaps and errors in the future. In the past, there have been a lot of data gaps and errors because there hasn't been, a center like this.
Oh, sorry, I just had a message from the interpreters asking if you could slow down a little bit so they've got time for their interpretation.
Okay.
Thank you. Natsuki, thank you.
Okay, I think I just also saw a message saying no sound. You can hear me, right?
Yep, no, we can hear you. Thank you.
Yeah, so we will be establishing this center at the federal level, and the province and local government will forward the reports to this center as well. And the data and information collected and compiled by this center will be used to prepare reports on adaptation that meets reporting obligations at national and international level. So the MNR system will be completely an automated system this time, and we have also started working on a skeleton for establishing a web-based structure. So the reason that why we are going all automated and we are focusing on having an IT-based MNR system for climate change adaptation this time is because we've had many MNR systems in the country at different levels of the government, at the ministry and everywhere. But because of absence of this IT-based system, we've had a lot of data errors and duplication in the past. So in order to avoid that, we are going IT-based this time. And the MNR system is being developed following a rigorous consultation with stakeholders and following a participatory approach. And this approach we've also followed during the overall NAP process as well. It has been a very rigorous multi-stakeholder engagement process. So we are doing the same for the MNR process as well. One thing we've learned is that in order to
Мы, например, пришли к выводу, что для того, чтобы يكون النظام مؤتمت и создать ее, необходимо работать со всеми заинтересованными.
In order to build ownership from the beginning, and that we have been doing in our case. But despite that, we've also been facing some challenges in the process, basically on data gaps, inadequate legislation framework, limited technical capacity, and other problematic limitations. But despite these challenges, we've progressed well on our work on establishing MNR system in Nepal. I mean, we'll soon be working on finalizing the indicators and going on the establishment phase of this system. Right now, we've just started the consultation. So this is all I have from me now. I think we're running out of time. So thank you for this opportunity, and thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much, both Jessica and Benaya, for your great presentations. So we're going to have another presentation now before going on, have hopefully a few minutes at least for our final Q&A slot. So we're going to hear from Bora Kim, who's also from UNEP, on their climate services and early warning system portfolio. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard, and thank you everyone for inviting me to provide some insight into what we are doing at UNEP. to address climate services and early warning systems. I know in the past 2 days, you've had some sessions from UNDRR and ESCAP on disaster risk statistics. So I'm here to just talk to you about what UNEP is doing to kind of decrease the disaster risk and help build country capacities on disaster risk reduction and early warning systems and climate services. So UNEP is the global authority for the environment, with programs focusing on what we refer to as the triple planetary crisis, which includes climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. So overall, UNEP works on delivering transformational change for people and nature by drilling down on the root causes of the 3 planetary crises. And honing in on climate change as one of the triple planetary crises, UNEP's medium-term strategy for 2022 to 2025 identifies climate action as a critical priority and recognizes science as a foundation for transformative action. And this really brings us to climate information and early warning services as science-based transformative action in climate change adaptation. So I know that not all of you may be familiar with climate services and early warning systems. So I just want to give a little bit of background. So climate services provide climate information to help individuals and organizations and governments make climate smart decisions. And early warning systems are integrated systems that deliver timely and relevant information on weather and climate hazards and enable people to make informed decisions and take action to reduce disaster risks. So national and international databases provide high quality data on temperature, rainfall, wind, soil moisture, and ocean conditions, as well as maps, risk and vulnerability analyses, assessments, and even long-term projections and scenarios. And then we have socioeconomic variables and non-meteorological data, such as agricultural production, health trends, human settlement in high-risk areas, road and infrastructure maps for the delivery of goods, and all of these may be combined depending on user needs. So together with the national and international databases and the socioeconomic variables, all of this data and information collected is then transformed into customized products such as projections, trends, economic analysis, and services for different user communities. So early warning systems based on this type of information are a proven, effective, and feasible climate adaptation measure that really save lives and provide a tenfold return on investment. The WMO's State of the Global Climate 2021 report showed that extreme weather events such as floods, droughts, heat waves, and storms led to hundreds of billions of dollars of economic losses and had a heavy toll on human lives and well-being. The IPCC 6th assessment report on impacts adaptation and vulnerability recognized early warning systems and disaster risk management activities as key cross-cutting adaptation options that enhance the benefits of other adaptation measures when combined. So recognizing all of the benefits of climate services and early warning systems, last year in 2022 on World Meteorological Day, the UN Secretary General made the bold statement stating that today, 1/3 of the world's people, mainly in least developed countries and small island developing states, are still not covered by early warning systems. This is unacceptable, particularly with climate impacts sure to get even worse. Early warnings and actions save lives. And to that end, today I announce the United Nations will spearhead new action to ensure every person on Earth is protected by early warning systems within 5 years. So based on this statement, there has been an initiative, a UN-wide initiative called the Early Warnings for All that has been developed and has now an action plan with 4 different pillars pictured here. So we have disaster risk knowledge, observations and forecasting, preparedness and response, and dissemination and communication. Those are the 4 pillars covering the main areas of intervention of the disaster risk reduction cycle. And UNEP, along with WMO and UNDP and UNESCO, co-leads the implementation of Pillar 2, which is observations and forecasting. So UNEP's potential contributions to the UN-wide Early Warnings for All initiative include our country projects in the region and also the Systematic Observations Financing Facility shown on this slide, as well as other initiatives. So the Systematic Observations Financing Facility, otherwise called SOF, is a new financing mechanism that was co-created and co-founded by the World Meteorological Organization, WMO, UNDP, and UNEP. The SOF was legally established as a UN multi-partner trust fund at COP26 in 2021. And the SOF will close the critical data gaps in least developed countries and small island developing states that will ensure that climate adaptation is informed by the best available science and data. And enhanced predictions and understanding of climate change and its impacts will empower government officials to take proactive early action that will save lives and livelihoods. And this initiative, in support of the Paris Agreement, it will also strengthen the international response to climate change by filling the data gaps that limit our understanding of the climate. And this also fits under Pillar 2, which is observations and forecasting of the Early Warnings for All initiative. So with the Early Warnings for All, UNEP has, as I mentioned, various projects under the SOF, as well as our portfolio, establishing, upscaling, and strengthening integrated climate information services and people-centered multi-hazard early warning systems for resilience and adaptive capacity funded by various global funds, such as the Green Climate Fund. So we have 12 countries that we are supporting directly as UNEP in the SOF initiative. And we currently have 8 GCF and Adaptation Fund proposals being developed in the pipeline, covering 15 countries across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And we currently have 2 approved GCF initiatives. So we have a $49.9 million program for 5 Pacific Island countries and a $21.7 million project for Timor-Leste. And I will give a little bit more information on these 2 initiatives specifically later on. And in Early Warnings for All, the initiative has identified 30 priority countries for the initial phase. And of those 30 countries, we are, through our various initiatives, we are supporting 4 countries of those 30, including Maldives, Nepal, Kiribati, and Sudan. So within our project-based portfolio, we strive to develop projects with an integrated and holistic approach to climate services and early warning systems, in line with the WMO 4 components of early warning systems, and also in line with the 4 pillars of the UN Early Warnings for All initiative. So our projects and programs are generally designed with these 4 components in mind. We have a sustainable delivery model for climate services and multi-hazard early warning systems. We have enhanced observations, monitoring, modeling, and prediction. We have improved dissemination and communication to the last mile. And we have strengthened climate risk management capacity. So within the sustainable development delivery model for climate services and multi-hazard early warning systems, we look to establish things such as the National Framework for Climate Services, climate outlook forums in line with WMO requirements, sustainable financial strategies and business models, and more. Within the enhanced observations, modeling, and prediction, we look to help establish essential surface-based observations that are compliant with the WMO Global Basic Observing Network, GBON requirements, develop impact-based forecasting, developed risk and hazard mapping, and more. And within the improved dissemination and communication to the last mile, we focus on establishing communication systems to reach the last mile populations, the most vulnerable populations, and coordinate and integrate communication protocols. And then the last one, within the strengthened climate risk management capacity, we focus on increasing country preparedness and response capabilities, and also increasing public awareness and education and others. So an example of these multi-partner initiatives with holistic and integrated approaches to climate services and early warning systems are the previously mentioned 2 GCF-funded initiatives that are currently under implementation. So this is one example. The title of the project or program actually is the Enhancing Climate Information and Knowledge Services for Resilience in 5 Pacific Island countries. This program is a $49.9 million program that will establish integrated climate and ocean information services and multi-hazard early warning systems in the Cook Islands, Niue, Palau, Marshall Islands, and Tuvalu. And the program will support increased climate resilient, sustainable development in the 5 Pacific Island countries through targeted climate information system and early warning system investments. The program aims to deliver transformative impact to the entire population of the 5 countries, with 80% of the population expected to directly benefit from enhanced livelihoods and increased resilience to climate change and climate-related hazards. The program is also expecting to achieve a 15 to 30% reduction in economic loss and damage incurred due to climate-related hazards. And of course, the program will directly contribute to the attainment of selected targets and indicators in the Paris Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and is in line with the UN-wide Early Warnings for All initiative. The second project example is the project in Timor-Leste. This is titled Enhancing Early Warning Systems to Build Greater Resilience to Hydrometeorological Hazards in Timor-Leste. So this project is just for one country and is a $21.7 million program that will address the urgent need for integrated and end-to-end climate information services and multi-hazard early warning systems through comprehensive institutional, technical, and technological capacity building from the national to the local level. And this will help to generate and disseminate robust climate data and information at all stages of the climate services value chain. So this project as well aims to deliver transformative impact to the entire population of Timor-Leste, with 80% of the population expected to directly benefit from enhanced livelihoods and increased resilience to climate change and climate-related hazards. And this project as well will directly contribute to the attainment of selected targets and indicators in the Paris Agreement, the Sustainable Development Goals, and the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and again is in line with the UN-wide Early Warnings for All initiative. So that's all for my presentation today. I just want to stress again that with the UN Secretary General's statement on early warning systems in March of 2022, we are seeing global mobilization and significant movement in the climate services and early warning systems realm. So it's definitely an exciting time to be working in this field right now, particularly with developing countries and capacity development that is critical to addressing the adaptation to climate change and the triple planetary crisis. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barakem. It's a very informative presentation, and great to kind of hear about those programs kind of in the region. So we have some time now for questions. I think we've probably got about up to 5 minutes for questions. So kind of please share your questions for kind of any of our kind of last speakers, either kind of in the chat or simply pop up your hands, and kind of our speakers available to answer those. Can't see anything coming up in the chat. Okay, I think there were also great presentations, kind of in terms of, I think, setting out kind of what's being done, kind of really clearly, kind of so. It may be kind of that no one's got any additional questions to ask for now. So I just give a kind of another few seconds for any last minute hands or last minute questions in the chat. Otherwise, we'll kind of move on to make sure that we finish our webinar on time. Okay, so thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Benaya, and thank you, Bayrakim, for your presentations. So as we move now towards the end of this two-day webinar, we're going to kind of hear from Gabriel from UNSD again, who, as promised, is going to speak about the importance of institutional cooperation and governance in the context of the DA14 project that was introduced yesterday. So these topics are particularly important for climate change and disaster-related statistics. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what Gabriel has to say, and also like to thank him again for joining at what must be an incredibly antisocial hour in New York. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be back with you, and I've been following the discussion just at the moment. It's really interesting and I would say challenging what you're developing at the moment. And my presentation is actually something I believe that is very important when it comes to climate change and disaster-related statistics. It's the importance of institutional cooperation and governance. When I speak about governance here, it goes beyond data governance. It means also how to interact, how to cooperate, how to collaborate between producers of official statistics, but also all the other entities and organizations that are collecting or holding data for various purposes, data that can be reused to inform about climate change and disaster-related statistics. In my presentation today, I will say a few words also, but very, very quickly. Usually I do this kind of presentation for 3 days let's say we have webinars of 3 days discussing about this cooperation and governance in the field of official statistics. But people working in national statistical offices and other producers of official statistics are working according to the United Nations fundamental principles of official statistics. These principles have been endorsed in 2014 by the General Assembly, and there are a couple of principles there that are extremely important. I don't want now to go through these principles. I think that's not the purpose. But one thing I wanted to say is that these principles have been developed not only to secure the highest quality, timeliness, disaggregation of data and statistics for decision-making purposes, but also to honor the citizens' right to access data and in particular statistics. It's not all about leaving no one behind when it comes to decision making, but it's also leaving no one behind in having access to statistics. It's important in a democratic society because we want to understand the decisions that have been taken by our decision makers, but we want also to assess the impact of those decisions. And this will be a little bit the purpose of my presentation today. So it's not all about data, it's also about official statistics. Now, during COVID-19, we have noticed that we were not prepared to rapidly, quickly address emerging needs for data and statistics, assessing the impact of COVID, but also after COVID-19 to assess design recovery policy. And we have noticed that our main problem is that we were not working in cooperation with other producers of data and statistics within a country. And because of that, we had problem to access the data. What are, just to start very quickly, the advantages of sound governance and coordination? And you have been discussing these issues. Again, we go here beyond data governance, and we think also a little bit about institutional governance and institutional coordination between the actors in the data sector. So the coordination, you have here a definition which is within a system: activities, responsibilities, command and control structures are synchronized, harmonized, and when appropriate, integrated. So this is also something that is important in small developing islands, for example, because they have limited resources. And the whole idea of the coordination is to improve efficiency and synergies of operation by avoiding overlapping efforts, duplication of work, and reducing the response burden through data sharing. In our case, probably the response burden is something that is not so important, but data sharing is fundamental because we don't want to collect twice the same set of data. Effectiveness by addressing demands for statistics in an organized and timely manner through capability through the capability to jointly produce expected outputs. The quality, and this was discussed just now, coherence, comparability, and accessibility. We have also, to some extent, we have to avoid having in one country 20, 30, 40 different databases with the information and the data that are important for a specific sector, but ideally at least having a portal that allows us to access these different databases. And then eventually, and that is the last point, develop a corporate identity and secure trust. And this is fundamental in official statistics, but I would go even beyond in the national data ecosystem. Why are we speaking about official statistics? Of course, the whole purpose here is not only to discuss cooperation, coordination, governance of the national statistical system, but you have heard this new term, the national data ecosystem. So it's the ability to go beyond what we call official statistics and reach out to the data community. But official statistics in general has a rather restrictive definition. They are all the entities within countries that are producing statistics according exactly to the fundamental principles of official statistics, as I mentioned before, that have been endorsed by the General Assembly in 2014. You have here a few explanatory notes. I don't want to speak longer about that. So who are the producers in general of national official statistics? So basically, who are part of this national statistical system? We have the National Statistical Office, that is often the leading entity in countries producing statistics. So basically, to come back, transforming data that do not speak to the users into something that makes sense, and not only for a few decision makers, but for the citizens and the population at large. It's very important in terms of trust. We want to understand what our decision makers are doing, and we want also to assess the impact of their decisions. We have, of course, in every country, a certain number of other producers of official statistics in ministries, in agencies that are operating in compliance with the fundamental principles of official statistics. But already here, I can mention that there are many, of course, many other producers of data in the country. And it's very important, and it will be the end of the conclusion later of my presentation, is that how can we make sure that all data available within a country from public or private sector can be eventually used for official statistics. And we have many of these data, and it's true that before COVID-19, we were maybe focusing mainly on the coordination of the national statistical system. And we didn't systematically reach out to all these other data producers that are existing in our countries. Here, just very quickly, you can see the National Statistical Office in dark blue. They have the other producer of official statistics in agencies and ministries, but we have also other data communities. I mean, like the private sector, big data, geospatial data, citizen-generated data, that are all important data sources for the production of official statistics. And then we have our main users, institutional users, but also all these users that are actually consuming statistics in order to provide additional value to our data. So this is a point that is important. So just to come back to the resolution of the General Assembly, we have the Principle 8 of the UN Fundamental Principle for Official Statistics that says coordination among statistical agencies within countries is essential to achieve consistency and efficiency in the statistical system. This was actually the resolution from 2014. And then in the General Assembly resolution on the SDG indicator framework, it says national statistical officers are the coordinators of the national statistical system, and further, all activities of the national statistical system to be conducted in full adherence to the fundamental principles of official statistics. Again, the importance here is to build up trust, not only in data and statistics within a country, but also in the institutions and organizations producing this information. What are the different coordination instruments within a national statistical system, but also beyond national statistical system, in order to cover all producers of data and statistics within a country? We have, of course, and this is important, we know that the coordination through normative and legal frameworks, not only, and I will come with my last slide about that, the national law or regulations or ordinances on official statistics, but we know also that in many countries, more and more, we have law on data protection, privacy, that allows actually different actors produce of information that have been collected initially by different private and public entities, not for statistical purposes. It can be for management purposes, it can be for business purposes, and that can be reused for official statistics. We have the coordinator advocating for one integrated programs. Of course, I mean, when it comes to operational elements, every entity part of the system can have its own program, but it's very important that the citizens and decision makers are also have an overview of the different statistical and data activities that are planned within a country, and that are implemented within a country. We have the coordination through data acquisition, collection, and sharing. And in particular, in sharing, we are still rather bad. We collect data, and we believe that the data is ours, and we tend not to share data with other partners within the sector of activity, but even more outside the sector of activity. And we have learned from COVID-19, but you know exactly that too, because you are discussing this in terms of climate change and disaster-related statistics, that there are many different actors from different sectors that are involved in producing data and statistics in that specific field. The coordination through methodology, technology, and standards, that is fundamental in order to secure the quality and the consistency and the comparability of data and statistics, again, within a sector, but also across different sectors. Coordination through dissemination and communication. I say a few words just before about the importance of having at least a national portal, and not to actually avoiding having a high number of portals in a country dealing with data and statistics that cannot be accessed at least through a single entry point. Coordination through quality assurance and branding. This is an important point that I don't want to discuss it further, but quality assurance means thinking about how can I assure the quality ex ante in the production process, and not ex post once we have the data to assess if the data is of high quality or not, because it's often too late that we have our information, and we cannot, also for financial reasons, we cannot restart the overall process from the scratch. And this starts, of course, with the data collection. Coordination through human resources, training and pooling within the national data ecosystem, right? Not to train people and say, this is my person, but also to try to share the human resources that we have with other data producers and statisticians. And then coordination through international cooperation and capacity building. And this is exactly what we are doing today. Just to tell you, I mean, we saw before the difference between the national data ecosystem, and we understood how important it is to reach out to the national data ecosystem. And then we have, on the other hand, here the national statistical system. I just wanted to list here a certain number of fundamental elements that secure trust in official statistics, but also in the institutions producing these statistics. On the right side, I mentioned them already, the UN fundamental principles, the UN National Quality Assurance Framework, the different regional statistics code of good practices, and you have a certain number of links. Okay, the national statistical legislation, but also all the international guidelines, methodology, and nomenclatures that are existing worldwide and are eventually adapted at national level. And on my left side, there are actually all these elements we have not paid a lot of attention in the past, because we believe that we are experts and technicians on data, but they are fundamental if we want to secure in the future access to the wide diversity of data sources within a country. That's the Privacy and Data Protection Act or regulations, well known within the European Union, the Public Information Access Act, and in some countries also the Archiving Act, and who knows, the Code of Data Ethics. So here are my slides and my presentation. If you want more information about the elements that I have presented, there is a handbook on management and organization of national statistical system that goes through all the elements that I have presented here. Thank you very much. The floor, I give it back to you.
Thank you very much, Gabriel. And I think, as I mentioned before, I think these are incredibly important topics, governance and cooperation, for thinking about when we look at climate change and disaster-related statistics. So it was very helpful that we're able to cover them as part of this webinar. And so I'm sure if you get in contact with Gabriel and invite him, he'll be more than happy to give the 3-day version of that presentation. So it's now over to me to bring our webinar to a close. But before I do, I just want to share something on the way forward in terms of the activities that we have planned under the DA14 project. So this slide here shows some of the activities that we're planning going forward. So one key activity, which is being led by our colleagues in UNEP, is the development of improved data collection tools for selected indicators of the global set of climate statistics and indicators. And in particular, they're looking to take forward work involving the collection of data on national integrated coastal zone management and the proportion of municipal waste treated, with particular focus on food waste, in order to help contribute to global reporting for the SDGs. We heard earlier about the third expert forum for users and producers of disaster-related statistics, which will take place during the week of the 5th of June, and for which some information was shared in the chat. And Kunpo, maybe if you could just quickly put up that flyer, if we've got that in the slides. Brilliant. Thank you very much. So this event is going to take place in Bangkok on the week of the 5th of June. There'll be a mixture of in-person only sessions and also hybrid sessions which you can join. We will reshare the link for more information about the forum and how to register, so please take a look at that. Anyway, as part of this DA14 project, we're going to be organising an associate event alongside the expert forum, particularly on assessing challenges, needs and opportunities in advancing climate change and disaster-related statistics in Asia and the Pacific, which I think really provide an excellent opportunity to build on what we've heard over the past 2 days, really helping to support strategic planning at the national level. So, as has been mentioned, we're going to be working with a selected number of target countries, country level, to increase capacity to respond to demand for statistics related to climate change and disasters. And as was noted by Gabriel yesterday, the process for identifying those target countries is being done at the project level and is still being developed. So we don't have any more information right now we can share with you about the selection of target countries, but certainly want to add that our intention is that we're going to be able to start this work with individual countries towards the end of this year. And finally, in terms of activities under this work stream, to mention that as the project progresses, we're going to be organising further global webinars, which will be focused on sharing the latest developments, sharing country achievements, and also future challenges. So to start to bring things to a close, I would like to say a big thank you to all of our presenters, our interpreters, and everyone who's contributed to the discussions. We've had 23 presentations over the course of the 2 days from 21 different experts. We've had an absolutely amazing team of interpreters who've been able to share things between the 3 different languages. Copies of the presentations from both days, we'll look to make those available as PDFs and place them on the event webpage. We'll also try and share additional resources that were mentioned through there. We have a post-webinar survey which Kunpo has just shared in the chat. We'd really appreciate it if you could take just a couple of minutes to fill out that survey. You just click on the link now, start filling it out. That would be incredibly helpful to us. We can really want your suggestions and comments, so we can understand how useful this webinar has been in helping improve everyone's understanding of these important topics, and also helping us to plan future events so we can learn from your feedback. I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our DA14 project partners. I mentioned our co-organisers yesterday, ESCAP and UNEP, and in particular colleagues Katia, Roxy, and Paul from ESCAP and UNEP. But also want to say a thank you to our collaborators under this project work stream, ECA, UNECE, ECLAC, ESCWA, and UNSD, who have all helped contribute to developing the program for this webinar. So thank you very much to them. If anyone has any follow-up questions, would like to get in contact with any of the presenters, we had the email addresses of our main contacts available up on the screen there. So please get in touch with any of the four of us, and we'll either try to answer your questions directly or put you in contact with the relevant people. So thanks once again to everyone. I'd like to bring today's workshop to a close. Thank you very much.